You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. By going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com, you can make this possible.
All right, folks, let's talk about Eric Garner case. The trial, the hearing of the officer who killed Eric Garner, Daniel Pantaleo, continues, and testimony has been quite interesting. His partner, police officer Justin Damico, admitted to falsifying the police report to exaggerate Garner's crime. Now, Garner would have had to have had 10,000 cigarettes for it to be accurate. He actually only had 5 packs. The trial resumes June 5th. And I got to tell you, Scott, I mean, what we're seeing here, lying police officers, making stuff up. Pantaleo said that he actually saved Garner's life by him not falling through a plate glass window. What is exposing, I think what this disciplinary hearing is exposing is the facade of police officers holding each other accountable and how they will lie if necessary. How in the hell can you say 10,000 packs is close, 10,000 cigarettes is close to 5 packs?
Well, it certainly is a lie, but I got to tell you, I'm not surprised at it at all. It goes on every day in the criminal justice system. I spent 5 years in New York as a state prosecutor, and at intake, if you will, where the police come in and tell you the story. If the attorney, if the prosecutors, the assistant U.S. attorney or the assistant district attorney isn't testing that story and using logic, 9 times out of 10, the prosecuting attorney or the ADA, as you will, signs off on it and just moves it forward. And so the value of having really strong prosecutors, people of color who are prosecutors, is that they test those stories for credibility. And if you're really good, being a prosecutor is about justice, not about prosecutions and getting convictions. And you just don't have that in this particular case. But what's really unusual is that you have sworn testimony now from a fellow police officer. I don't know whether he had a deal or not, or whether he's trying to save himself or not, but whatever the dynamic is, he admitted that he lied because he thought that the 10,000 cigarettes would mean that they had greater latitude in how they were trying to restrain him. To have a more serious crime meant perhaps that we had to have the chokehold because he was resisting more because he had 10,000 cigarettes on him as opposed to just 5 packs. That's the dynamic you're working with. It's awful, but unfortunately, in this country, in our criminal justice system, it goes on every day. And there's no way to unpack that, if you will, because of that thin blue line where they support one another and nobody was there on the scene but them. And so they create the narrative, they defend it, and very oftentimes people go to jail because of that false narrative.
The way to do it, Dr. Carter, is that if an officer lies on a report, they're fired.
Absolutely, but I think oftentimes we see that police departments, fellow police officers, are willing to pay the civil penalties for lying police officers and the things that they do. Whether he had 1,000 cigarettes, 100, or 10,000, that man should not be dead today for that offense or any other, really. I mean, what they did, that lie, just sort of furthers the narrative that Eric Garner was somehow dangerous, that Officer Pantaleo and the others were in danger when they were not. And it allows them to continue to harass the citizens of New York, right? Harass the passerbys and others who took video of this illegal search and then this now illegal use of chokehold that led to this man's death. I mean, I think for me, we all agree that this does not help anyone. These kinds of crimes that police officers commit erode public trust, erode public faith, and they are hurtful and detrimental to those who get caught up in the legal system as a result of these lying actions or who are dead because of their actions. Right. But the fact of the matter is there is sort of no political will in these departments to really take on this poor culture. I mean, all the shows that we get, the officers who get arrested from time to time, even this trial, I mean, I think it's all political theater, and it's really not going to amount to anything unless we're talking about the things you're talking about, Roland, which are real reforms in the police system, in the way we do policing, and the ways that we don't reward officers who actually do harm the public.
Mike, again, what we're facing here is we have to confront the reality. where cops are consistently lying. They will make things up. They will cover for each other. And that's what this is exposing. And frankly, that officer who is admitting he lied should also be disciplined. And again, I believe that if cops lie on police reports and make things up, they should lose their jobs.
And keep in mind, I think supposedly Mr. Gardner knew one of the officers. So you can't even use, oh, I had a relationship with him, everything should have been fine. It wasn't like that. That's why we don't see this happening in the white community. We don't see white men walking down the street getting tackled by cops unless clearly he or she was the aggressor. Mr. Gardner was not an aggressor.
And even then you don't.
And even then you don't. Mr. Gardner clearly was not.
Shooters get counted.
But what we talked about before, Roland, I know Scott and I have talked about it, until you change the standard of what's held for a police officer in a courtroom, these particular things are going to continue to happen because all they have to do is say they were in danger and they've met the standard.
Yeah, Mike,
until that standard changes, we're going to continue to see this.
And you know, Michael, the other thing that we ought to be talking about is why politicians, elected officials are so afraid to hold the police lobby, state by state, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, accountable for these actions. They are terribly afraid of the police lobby because the police lobby is charged with protecting and serving our community. It really is. And until and the police lobby holds elected officials hostage, right? Because if they don't get the endorsement, or if they do a work slowdown where people are not protected in their communities, there's always that underlying or outright threat that, well, if you handcuff me and you don't let me do my job and deal with the bad guys, then I'll just stop dealing with the bad guys altogether. And it's that constant threat and that danger, political danger in the minds of elected officials that really means that they're not going to hold the police accountable. They're going to allow the police to do their business the way they want to do their business out of pure fear, not just political, but community fear. We got to figure out a way to get behind that and eliminate that too.
The real deal is this. You're absolutely right when it comes to endorsements, but here's the other real deal. White voters believe cops.
Exactly.
And if white voters say, oh, this candidate got the police department endorsement and got the police union endorsement and got the firefighters union endorsement, then we're going to go with them. That's why for all of these years, Michael, and you know this, Democrats have always had to play, I got to be tough on crime.
Right. Because
the Republicans always said they were soft on the crime, and it was Republican candidates who always would get the endorsements of the unions. And that's, you see Donald Trump doing it as well. That's the game here. And it makes no sense, even when district attorneys are involved, how DAs appeal to the endorsements of the unions when they're the ones who are going to be deciding whether or not a cop can actually be tried or indicted, and that makes no sense.
And that's why the whole criminal justice reform conversation, and yes, the First Step Act was very important. Yes, I know it was the first step. I get it. But let's see how hard they fight on sentencing reform. Because until you do that, you do not have full criminal justice reform. And let's see how Attorney General Barr handles that. He won't even look at sentencing reform, I guarantee you. Neither will 45. So yes, First Step Act was important, but until you deal with sentencing reform, criminal justice reform has not occurred.
But the bottom line is here, the First Step Act only applies to the federal level, where you have a little more than 200,000 people in prison, Dr. Carter. You have 2 million people who are in state prison. More people are impacted by what is happening on the state and the local level, not the federal level. And so we can tout the First Step Act all day, but more people are going to be impacted on state levels. And the issue we have here is whether or not you have district attorneys who have the credibility in order to go after these cops and hold them accountable for lying. The Staten Island district attorney refused to indict Pantaleo. In fact, he operated more like a defense attorney as opposed to the person who was seeking justice. Dr. Carter, last comment on the story.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to really be clear that crime goes both ways, right? We saw this in Philadelphia. We've seen it in Staten Island. We've seen it in this city. Officers lie, officers abuse their power, officers commit crimes all the time. And so we have to acknowledge that police officers' words are not law. And I think Scott was exactly right. We have to question the statements that they're making. Just because the person says it doesn't make it so. I mean, we had a case here where a young man found himself back in prison, right, for a parole violation over a charge that should never have happened in the first place. It was thrown out. But because he had contact with this officer, he's in violation of his release. And these are the kinds of things that are really egregious. This is the stuff that we really need to look at and acknowledge that this system and this fetishization of police officers and the truth of that badge are all up for questioning, right? When we're talking about justice and seeking the truth.
In Atlanta, for our school choice is the Black Choice Town Hall event. There was an elementary school in Atlanta, folks. This is a black elementary school. 5% of the school's students were reading on grade level. I'm gonna repeat that. In Atlanta, 5% of the children were reading on grade level. So you then have to ask the question, what's gonna happen when they're in middle school? What's gonna happen when they are in high school? Will they ever be able to catch up? Will they be consigned for the entire life of being behind?